David Marsh.
Charlie.
It's been a while since we did one of these.
It is. What would it be?
It'll be a year, I
A
reckon.
year, righto. Yep.
It might have been last spring. We had a bit of a go. Probably a bit earlier in the spring than now.
Yeah.
Because we are at the end of October.
That's right.
2021.
Normally expect, mid-30s temperatures by now.
I know.
And it's 18 degrees today.
I was wishing I brought my little jacket over this morning.
I'll have to lend you mine.
Nearly hit you up for a pullover.
Yeah.
David, thank you for your time this morning.
Pleasure, Charlie.
We had a bit of a chat about what we might talk about.
That's right. We're off topic already, I think, with this one. But it is an interesting story.
You just take us through it then.
Yeah. Well, this paddock is a very good cropping paddock. And then when we started with the planned grazing, it had a crop of canola in it. And so we just went cold turkey, did nothing, as in didn't sow a pasture or anything. And the first year, it was almost 100% capeweed. It was just absolutely solid. And I wouldn't have thought this was a big capeweed paddock, to be honest.
So what year is this?
This is 2000 it would have been.
2000,
Yeah.
right. Yep.
So it was massive capeweed infestation, and it remained that way. We grazed it exactly the same way as we grazed every other paddock. And then the capeweed eventually died as the weather warmed up, and you could tap it. It was like a scab, actually. And then you could lift it up, and it was just seething with little insects, little rutherglen bugs underneath it. Now, that only happened for 1 year. I'd never seen capeweed in this paddock since. So this is an example of, that succession is real, and nothing dominates for long. And those early successional species like capeweed and taprooted plants like marshmallow and all the things that we saw last year after those few dry years, they're transient species, and they're preparing the way for the next level of succession, which are the grasses. And you can see here that this has got a lot of annual grasses in it this year, a lot of wild oats and a lot of ryegrass this year, more ryegrass than I've seen for years. Last year there was a huge clover year. I've never seen as big a clover year, I don't think, ever. And this year there's clover, but there's nothing like the clover there was last year. I was frightened to put cattle in this paddock. In fact, I got my adjustment clients to come over and give me the green light to put them in, because I thought it might be dangerous, but it wasn't. We didn't lose any. So yeah,
From bloat.
yeah, that was what I was worried about. So yeah, and so we've done nothing in here, and it's there are a lot of summer active species here. They're not evident at the moment. It's still too cool, but it's turned into a really good summer paddock. It's a good all year paddock because it's got species that'll they'll react to rainfall at any time of the year, which is really what you're after. And so it's also very cheap because it's looking after itself. It's supplying its own goods and services. We're grazing it, and it's gradually turning into a more perennial based pasture.
What are some of the goods and services it's providing itself?
Oh, well, actually that's a really fascinating thing. If you look at a monoculture crop, or no, let's go the other way. You look at a diverse pasture, lots of species of all different sorts. The diversity within it is what enables it to function as an ecosystem whole, and it doesn't need, it produces a seed bed, it produces seed, it purifies water, it creates soil structure. I mean, there's all these things that when you go to a monoculture, you then become responsible for all those things because you've removed its diversity and resilience. And so they're the cash cost of agriculture, really. That's why it's often hard to make a quid out of agriculture. But if you let the ecosystem complicate itself, it'll look after itself. It'll supply its own fertility. It's a big recycling mechanism, and the stock you might run on it are just part of that recycling mechanism.
Any observations that you can impart about this season compared to last season, generally?
Yeah. Well, there were 3 dry years leading up to last year. Very favourable rainfall year last year, and it was warm right through the winter. And as I said, there was a huge amount of clover. Clover is an early successional species, but there was a massive, we had lots of paddocks that had a lot of capeweed in them. Not so much capeweed, more Pattersons curse probably. Pattersons curse, erodium, which is the wild geranium, crowfoot, a lot of that. Some of the lighter country to the east of here was almost a monoculture of it. If you look at it now, look also a bit further north, there were massive paddocks of saffron thistles, almost monocultures, that everyone was very worried about. This year there's hardly any, so you know, nothing dominates for very long.
So what's that? What's the difference between this and that?
Oh, okay.
Is in relation to
Righto.
temperature, time, water,
Yeah, all of that
management?
But so those dry years, effectively, what happens is the successional process, because it's been so dry, is set back to an earlier stage. So that dry weather is what ecologists call a catastrophic disturbance. Went on for 3 years, very hot soil temperatures, very dry soil moisture. Quite a lot of perennial species were probably dying, the exotic ones. What happens over that dry period is there's mineralisation of organic matter going on in the soil, which creates a big boost of nitrogen when it eventually rains. And because it was bare, I mean, bare country that's another catastrophic disturbance. The change that happens when you get a good season is
Around here, but get away from that wind a bit.
you'll get this surge of early successional species, tap-rooted species, and we had, and everyone had a lot of Pattersons curse last year around here.
Oh, yeah.
There were lots of purple paddocks everywhere. This year you can't see any.
A lot of people thinking, oh no, I was getting messages. What are you going to do about that? It's going to smother. It's going to, set you back, and you should be spraying. And
Yep. No, look, we certainly, I think everyone goes through that when they start doing things differently. They go through that angst of, well, what's going to happen, But the world's been functioning in a complex way before humans ever came along. And we've probably interrupted that, which is, we've done that because, cropping is a way of controlling the diversity so that all the sunlight that falls on the paddock you're cropping is going towards the product that you're going to sell. But it does have ongoing costs.
I was just going to say, just to add to that, the Pattersons curse thing.
Yeah.
I went to a spot yesterday, day before, where 12 months ago, just over 12 months ago, it was a foot and a half high, very thin stems, like they weren't bushy, they were just single stem Pattersons curse. Whole lot of stuff underneath, but the top, to look at it was just purple.
Yep.
I went back there down and I had trouble finding any plants at
That's right.
all, and it was incredible
Yeah.
to think that only 12 months ago it was almost a monoculture, visually, but when you pulled it apart, there was a whole lot of good stuff under there, just waiting for the paddo to dry up and then
here,
go.
These grasses here, this is prairie grass. It's an introduced perennial, but it likes high fertility, and that's what it's got around this tree where the cattle have been. There's lots of species that turn up when the conditions suit them. That's the name of the game, I think.
And we are, just while we're here, David, we're underneath a beautiful yellow box tree.
Yeah.
And it's buzzing with bees because it's flowering.
Yeah, no, the trees here, the box trees here have been flowering for 3 or 4 months, really. Yeah. And some of them, individual trees have had flowers on them for 2 months. So, it's just indicative of a huge season that there's plenty of moisture and there's no limit to their growth.